Okay. Okay. So here we go. Toldos. There's 2 pages. Iris, over to you.
Wow.
Okay. Isaac and Rebekah endure 20 childless years until their prayers are answered and Rebekah conceives. She experiences a difficult pregnancy as the children struggle inside her. God tells her that there are 2 nations in your womb and that the younger will prevail over the elder. Esau emerges first. Jacob is born clutching Esau's heel. Esau grows up to be a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Jacob is a wholesome man, a dweller in the tents of learning. Isaac favors Esau. Rebekah loves Jacob. Returning exhausted and hungry from the hunt one day, Esau sells his birthright, his rights as the firstborn, to Jacob for a pot of red lentil stew. In Gerar, in the land of the Philistines, Isaac presents Rebekah as his sister, out of fear that he will be killed by someone coveting her beauty. He farms the land, reopens the wells dug by his father Abraham, and digs a series of his own wells. Over the first 2, there is strife with the Philistines, but the waters of the 3rd well are enjoyed in tranquility.
Right, there's more.
Esau marries 2 Hittite women. Isaac grows old and blind and expresses his desire to bless Esau before he dies. While Esau goes off to hunt for his father's favorite food, Rebekah dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, covers his arms and neck with goat skins to simulate the feel of his hairier brother, prepares a similar dish, and sends Jacob to his father. Jacob receives his father's blessings for the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land, and mastery over his brother. When Esau returns and the deception is revealed, all Isaac can do for his weeping son is to predict that he will live by his sword, and that when Jacob falters, the younger brother will forfeit his supremacy over the elder. Jacob leaves home for Haran to flee Esau's wrath and to find a wife in the family of his mother's brother Laban. Esau marries a 3rd wife, Mechalat, the daughter of Ishmael.
Thank you. So you may remember Ishmael last week was given the blessing that he would be a blight on the humanity and he would live by the sword, and Esav also. So there you go. It's not a very good start in life. Okay, we've probably looked at the issue of sibling rivalry before. In fact, I know we did last year. I think we talked about the fact that Ephraim and Manasseh were the first 2 siblings not to have rivalry. The extreme example, of course, is Cain and Abel, but there are others. But we're going to look at something completely different here. We're going to look at a phrase which occurs in this week's Sedra, and this is the phrase. Now, we should probably look at it in Hebrew, and this is the phrase. Now, I'll tell you why we look at it in Hebrew, because you'll see a place that you may know very well, a neighborhood in Jerusalem. It says, "Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi," that Yitzchak sowed in that land. "Vayimtza b'shana hahi," and that very same year he reaped mea sharim. Sound like a place you know, right? 100-fold. Hashem, and Hashem blessed him. I will attempt to tell a joke, and those who understand it, you can tell it to your Israeli family. They may find it amusing. So Mea Sharim, of course, means 100-fold, right? It's also the name of very, very religious neighborhood in Jerusalem. So when I was in Yeshiva, my Yeshiva told the story of the guy who was in Shari Tzedek and his wife's having a baby, and the doctor comes out and says, "Congratulations, it's triplets." And the guy says, "Wow, that's amazing. We thought it was twins." He says, "Where are you from?" So the guy next to him who's waiting says, "Where are you from?" He says, "Kfar Shalosh." Right? Shalosh means 3. There's a place called Kfar Shalosh. Right? So anyway, the next guy, the doctor comes out and says to him, "Mazel tov, Mazel tov, you've had quadruplets." He said, "Wow, that's amazing." He says, "Thank God, wow." And the guy sitting next to him says, "Where are you from?" He says, "Kiryat Arba." Right? Kiryat Arba is a place. Arba means 4. So suddenly the guy goes white, and they say, "What's wrong?" He says, "I come from Mea Sha'arim."
Knew that was
Anyway, you can tell your Israeli family, they might appreciate it. Anyway, so so Isaac sowed in the land, he reaped 100-fold the very same year, the Lord blessed him. We're going to have a little look at this idea of blessing. We're going to look at it with regard to a specific idea, actually. The idea of kind of what you have to do in order to elicit blessings. There's a concept of what's called hishtadlus or hishtadlut in modern Hebrew. People talk a lot about a segula. I don't know if you've ever, someone said to you, this is a good segula. A segula means a good omen, right? So a segula for making a living is to do this or to do that. A segula for this is to wear a red thread. A segula for that is to, I don't know, whatever, say this particular verse 30 times or whatever. So I have a friend, he's a bit of a sarcastic. So he said, I found a brilliant segula for how to make a parnasa, right? How to make a living. What? He says, go get a job. So there's a concept of hishtadlus that you have to. People talk a lot about. It's almost a bit ridiculous sometimes. People talk about all these good luck charms, and meanwhile they don't do the most basic things, right? So segula for good health might be, I don't know, to go bathe in the mikveh of the Arizal in Tzafat. Another segula for good health is to go to your doctor regularly. So there's a concept of hishtadlus. Right? We find it in many things. That Judaism is a religion of common sense, of practical action. So when we talk about the hand of God and hashgacha pratis, and we talked about this last week, we talked about divine providence and how far it goes. We always talk about our personal responsibility to do the maximum in tandem with that. So how does a person make a living? You have to go work in some way. Don't expect to just sit back and the money come rolling in. You have to work cognizant of God's blessings and his providence, his hashgacha. By the way, hashgacha means supervision or oversight, right? When we talk about kashrut, we talk about, in England, they talk about shomering, but in most countries they use the phrase mashgiach. A mashgiach is someone who does hashgacha. Hashgacha is supervision or oversight. So hashgacha pratis means God's oversight of everything, right? His role in everything. So that doesn't replace personal responsibility and effort. What it means is a person should say to themselves, I need to work hard in order to because that's the way the world is, that the money doesn't just grow on trees unless you're the chancellor. So I have to work hard. However, I have to also know there's a God in this world. So for example, and this is always a bone of contention with certain communities that have a lax attitude to tax. The classic excuse they use is, well, in Russia, it was really hard. Okay, we don't live in Russia, we live in Britain or America or Israel, where there are, legal tax regimes, which without tax, people wouldn't, the public services wouldn't exist. And actually, if you, I don't know, let's say you, I have to say, I wouldn't say this, well, I'm saying it publicly, but I wouldn't say it too publicly, but certainly when I lived in New York, it was not uncommon to walk into a shop and the cash price was different from the card price. And it wasn't because of the card, what do they call it, fees. It was because of tax, right? Somebody who would never dream of working on Shabbos, right? It's a cognitive dissonance. A person would never dream of working on Shabbos, and yet they sincerely feel that they have to underreport their income to the IRS or to HMRC, otherwise they won't be able to pay the bills. So someone else come along and say, well, the same way that you feel that the only way you can make a living is to basically underreport your income to the revenue, because otherwise you believe you won't make enough money. I believe the only way I can make a living is to work on Shabbos. Oh, how can you work on Shabbos? God provides your parnasa. Really? If God provides your parnasa, why are you not happy to pay your taxes? I had a discussion with a few friends. A friend of mine who's in Cologne, Israel, he said, you're right. He said, it's a mindset which unfortunately has taken hold from the previous generation, particularly where they lived in countries with very harsh conditions and often unfair regimes. But it makes no sense. So a religious person, of course, they will work hard, but they will work hard within what is moral, ethical, and right, and halachic. So if a person feels the only way they can make a living is to work on Shabbos, then they've missed the whole point of God being your parnasa. If a person feels that the only way they can stay healthy is to see a doctor without praying and without making, efforts in mitzvahs, then they've missed the point of things. But if a person thinks that they're going to get healed by doing mitzvahs and not seeing a doctor, they've also missed the point, right? So it says that Yitzhak sowed and he reaped 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. Okay, let's see where are we going with this? Let's have a look. Right. Who would like to read this? This is from the Talmud. Who's our volunteer?
Okay,
Okay, Mark. I don't know why it's black on white, by the way. It's a different color for some reason.
Yeah. All right. A person's entire livelihood is allocated to him from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, except for expenditures for Shabbat and festivals, and expenditures for his son's Torah study. In these areas, no amount is determined at the beginning of the year. Rather, if he spends less, his income is reduced, and if he spends more, his income is increased.
I'd never heard that before about the Torah study. Actually, I'd heard this idea that your annual allocation at Rosh Hashanah doesn't include what you spend on, particularly on having guests on Shabbos and Yom Tov. I'd heard that before. So there is an idea that whatever you're going to make this year is decided at Rosh Hashanah. So whilst you have to, yes, you have to make a channel for that, your hishtadlus, at the end of the day, it's decided at Rosh Hashanah. Some people seem to be doing well through Corona, some people are not. Some of it's a bit illogical. So it was decided at Rosh Hashanah. But the Talmud says there's an exception. The exception is the money you spend for Shabbos and Yom Tov. I assume that doesn't just mean food, by the way. It's things like, I don't know, buying nice dishes or buying clothes for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And interesting, it says for Torah study as well. I didn't know that. So there you go. So if you spend, if you spend £1,000 on a cruise, probably that's cheap. I don't know, £5,000 on a cruise, then don't expect that you'll automatically make an extra £5,000 next year. But if you spend £5,000 on your Shabbos and Yom Tov hospitality, it seems that God will find a way to increase your income. Right? I don't know exactly how it works. I can tell you occasionally there have been times in our lives when surprising money has come our way in surprising ways. It doesn't always totally make sense. There's some wonderful stories of people that somebody gave X amount to tzedakah, and then the next week somebody came in and gave them X amount back, all kinds of things. But anyway, there is this idea that a person's livelihood is allocated on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, except what they spend on Shabbos and Yom Tov or Torah study. Okay, where are we going with this? We're going to look at the issue of actually faith in God. Interesting. Let's see. Okay, now here's another thing. It says in Tehillim, I can't remember which one, the joy of the Lord is your strength. It makes more sense in Hebrew. So this is what the Talmud has to say about that. Who would like to read that? Number 4.
I'll read it.
Me too.
Brenda, over to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of, for the joy of the Lord is in your strength? Rabbi Yohanan said, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to the Jewish people, my children, borrow on my account and sanctify the sanctity of the day of Shabbos and the festivals with wine, and trust in me, and I will repay this debt.
Okay, so interesting. First of all, we've got this idea that a person's parnasa is determined except for Shabbos and Yom Tov. So now it goes further than that. The Talmud says, not only that, so number 1, you should live within your means. I mean, okay, the other question could be is if your parnasa is decided Rosh Hashanah, you don't always know what it's going to be. It doesn't become apparent straight away, particularly if you're, let's say, self-employed or, what do you call it? Freelance. But anyway, or retired. But aside from that, it says, borrow on my account in order to celebrate Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? So conventional wisdom is you shouldn't borrow beyond your means. Talmud seems to be saying that you should borrow money, and who's going to repay the debt? God says, I will. So what that seems to be saying is that have faith in God, borrow money to buy your Shabbos food if you need, and to sanctify the Shabbos, and know that I will repay that debt, right? So he doesn't promise that for your cruise around the Caribbean, but he promises that, Shem promises that for your debt. So let me ask you a question. So you're going to go to, I don't know about, I was going to say Jewish care. Let's say you're going to go to a religious charity. Are you going to go to a religious person? Say, I want to borrow some money from you, please, because I can't afford to make Pesach. I want to borrow, I don't know, £500 from you to make Pesach. You say, okay, I get lots of requests for loans. How do I know you're going to pay me back? Can you offer a guarantor or some kind of security? You say, well, no. It says in the Talmud that God will repay. So Hashem will repay my debt. So on that basis, you should lend me the money. Because if I'm using the money for Shabbos and Yom Tov, so I'm happy to show you the receipts, then Hashem will repay my debt. Makes sense, right? What would you say if you were the bank manager?
No.
There's the door.
Yeah.
What would you say if you were the bank manager and you were a Talmudic scholar who believes in God?
Well, if Hashem is going to pay you back, then when you get the money back, then you pay your debt.
Right. It sounds
Well,
like a
probably
recipe
that-
for the.
God
Well,
didn't
could you
say he
get
was
God
going to
to pay
pay the one that lent him the money. It said God said was going to pay the one that borrowed the money.
We run into a little problem here, don't we? There's a beautiful idea of faith. You should trust in God, and if that means you have to borrow money to buy wine for Shabbos, then borrow money. On the other hand, if everybody did that without any means of paying it back, the economy would probably fall apart. Okay, I think a parallel would be to ask the following question: what does Halacha and Judaism say about life insurance?
No idea.
Okay, what does Judaism say about making provisions in the event of your untimely death? We just had it last week, Cedra. Avram bought land to bury Sarah, right? Now, I don't know if Avram knew that Mashiach's going to come one day and people are going to have eternal life and there's going to be resurrection of the dead. They may not have believed in that around then. But even if he did, you have this paradox that on the one hand, you're supposed to, there is a concept of buying a burial plot. People do it. Right? It doesn't shorten your life. In fact, I think it says in many places it lengthens your life. Don't ask me why. Avram bought a plot. He bought land for burial. He planned for his eventual demise. On the other hand, you're not supposed to live life like that. Should you buy life insurance? 100% yes. In the hope that you never have to use it. And Mashiach should come, we should all have long life. Does the biggest believer not try to buy a house or invest or put down their roots? People buy property. Even very, very religious people who believe Mashiach is coming right now buy property. Why? Why would you do that? Mashiach's coming. You don't need a mortgage. So we have this, it's the same kind of dichotomy that God will provide for me, but I have to also make a channel for it. I can have faith in God, but I have to make a channel for his blessings. The other important point is, it's not for me to tell you that you have to believe in God and lend me money, right? You can believe in God if you want to go borrow money recklessly. That's your choice. But for me to tell you, you have to lend me money because God's going to repay you, well, that should be my faith, not yours, right? Does that make any sense? So there's a big difference between my having faith for myself and telling someone else what to do. I think we've talked about this before when it comes to, let's say, for example, somebody's going through a nisayon, a trial or a test, right? So it says, I don't remember where it says, it's a famous thing. For yourself, you should look inward. So if something happens to you that you're not, if something bad or seemingly bad happens to you, it is absolutely correct to introspect, to look inward, see what you're doing wrong. What could I improve? What mitzvah could I take on? Is there something I need to do to shiva for? Is God giving me a sign or a message? When it comes to somebody else, it's absolutely not for you to make that reckoning on their behalf. Your job is to help them. That's the basis of tzedakah. Right? When somebody says, I've fallen upon hard times, can you help me out? You say, well, I'd love to help you out, but you fall upon hard times. God's obviously punishing you for something. It's not for me to interfere. Right? We don't do that. So I think one of the Rebbeim said, you have two eyes. One eye is a good eye to look at someone else, and the other eye is an eye to look at yourself critically. Right? So how you look at yourself, you should absolutely look. If you're somebody's rabbi and somebody comes to you and says, Rabbi, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, and I want to know, is there something religious about this? I want to know, I want to change. Then there's a conversation to be had. Is there something you can do to improve your relationship with God? But in everyday life, when you come across somebody in the street who's got their hand out for money, it's not for you to say to them, God's punishing you. He may be, but that's not for you to decide. Your job is to help them. Right? One of the Rebbeim said, what do we learn from an atheist? We learn something from everyone in this world. I'm sure I've said this before. What do you learn from an atheist? Anyone know what you learn from an atheist? You learn how to help another person. Because a believer might say, right? A believer might say, it's wrong, but a believer might say, I'm sorry to hear that you're in terrible financial trouble. I'm going to say some Tehillim with you or for you. Right? I'm sorry to hear you're not well. I'm going to pray for you. A non-believer will say, I'm sorry to hear you're in financial trouble. I will help you with some money. Because I don't believe in God. There's no point praying. So that should be our attitude to another person. I'm going to give you practical help. That is our attitude if you think about it. Right? We cook food for people. We give money to people. We help people out. Right? We collect clothes for asylum seekers. We don't say, oh, well, God put you in this situation. He'll get you out of it. For yourself, you can definitely have that attitude. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do the hishtadlus and make the effort, but it means you should believe that it's all in God's hands. For somebody else, it's also in God's hands, but it's not for you to tell them how to interpret that. So the answer to the question is, if your bank manager says, I'm not lending you money for Shabbos, okay, that's his prerogative. It's your job to ask, and it's his job to say no. I don't know who you're going to borrow from, but let's say there are ways you can borrow, right? I don't know. A payday loan, just terrible, terrible interest rates. The bottom line is that there is this idea. So we could struggle with this. Who am I going to borrow money from? It's saying basically, trust in me, I'll repay this debt. It doesn't say only borrow if you can afford to borrow. So we're going to run into a bit of theological difficulty here. So this was addressed already in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what he has to say. Very interesting. Who'd like to read?
I'll have a read.
Pam, do you want to read? Jeff, you want to read?
Yeah.
Off you go.
I'll read
Right.
it.
The more,
Jeff.
did Jeff want to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. The more generous one is in undertaking expenses for the sake of Shabbos, the preparing and preparing many desirable foods for it, the more praiseworthy he is, provided that he has the financial capacity. Even if he does not have money on hand, only movable property, he should pledge it as a security and take a loan against it. The Holy One, blessed be he, will provide for him with a means to repay the debt in his vein. Our sages 18 state, the Holy One, blessed be he, says, take a loan on my account, I will repay. The implication is that one Shabbos and festival expenses are not included in the allotment allocated to the person on Rosh Hashanah, when judgment is rendered, regarding his sustenance and other needs. Thus our sages state, 19, a man's entire sustenance and expenses are determined on Rosh Hashanah, wherein it is decided how much he will earn for the sake of his sustenance and his other needs throughout the year, except for the expenses on Shabbos and the festivals, for no allotment is made regarding them at all instead. If he increases his Shabbos and festival expenses, his income is increased. If, however, he has no property to use as collateral so that payment could be taken from them, he should now borrow. He shall not borrow in the expectation that God will repay. The rational sin, he has no resources of his own. He has no obligation to increase his Shabbos expenses beyond his capacity.
All right, did everyone follow that? It was a little bit wordy.
Yeah, it was a
Right,
bit weird, yeah.
So addressed our concern. Right? On the one hand, you say the more money you spend for Shabbos and Yom Tov, the more praiseworthy. So what does that mean? So the Shulchan Aruch says that means, I guess, basically, that if you get paid at the beginning of the, I don't know, you got paid at the beginning of the month, and it's the month of April, let's say, and Pesach's coming up, and you say to yourself, okay, so there's two ways I can do this. I could either make a very simple Pesach and spread my salary through the month to cover my expenses, or I can blow it all now on Pesach food, right? Or even, I don't know, let's say, you know, pay on my credit card and pay it back out of my salary, which means I won't have quite enough in my bank account for my expenses at the end of the month, but I have the money right now, so not borrowing from anyone else, potentially defaulting on my loan. It says do that. That seems to be what it's saying. So if you have, I don't know, if you get paid, whatever, I don't know, if you have £1,000 in the bank and you could use that now for Pesach, but then you're not sure how you're going to pay your electricity bill, seems from this you should use that for Pesach, because God will find a way to top up that money. If you have nothing in the bank right now from your annual allocation, then don't go borrow money that you can't pay back, right? It's a little nuance there. So if you have money in your budget, the problem is if you spend it now, you won't have money for other things. God says, I'll pay you back. Right? So it says here, for example, if you don't have money, you should pledge property as security and take a loan. But it's interesting. You take a loan on God's account. Why should you provide security? Because the person you're borrowing from shouldn't have to miss out. Right? If he's got nothing to use as collateral, And he says, don't borrow with expecting God to repay. So it seems like we're saying here, God's not going to make money appear out of nowhere. But what will happen is that if you have money now, or you don't have money now, but you'll have money later and you borrow now, then somehow it will all work out, provided you have some kind of channel for that blessing. If you literally have nothing, then don't borrow money to buy Shabbos and Yom Tov. Then go to Tzedakah or something. But if you've got money now, for example, and you're going to take it away from something else, don't worry about that. Spend it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. If you have to borrow money, borrow against something, right? So again, it's this idea. It's interesting. The lender is not being asked to believe in God. The borrower is. The borrower believes that God will repay it, and he won't lose his family silver or jewels or whatever that he's pawned in order to, right? So should you go pawn your family silver to pay for Shabbos? It seems according to this, yes, because God will find a way to pay you back. But don't expect someone to just lend you money with no collateral, because that's not your determination to make on their behalf. Now, sorry, I've just about to change.
You don't know,
No, I don't
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Hey, sorry,
Rabbi?
slightly unclear. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, not. Yes.
Oh, hello?
Can I ask you a question?
Nope. Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
There we go.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Well, not as
Yeah.
well, not as well
Yeah,
as
it's not as clear as before, but you're there.
Yeah, okay. I'll have to speak up. Okay. So there seems to be this idea that God will bless you sort of multifold for your Shabbos expenses, but you have to do it within some kind of a natural framework that makes it possible, right? So don't just go and blow all your money and borrow money to pay for Shabbos. But if it's a case of allocating money from something else, trust in God to repay you. Now, there's another example where we're told in very strong terms in the Torah that God will repay us multifold if we keep a Shabbos. Anyone know what it is? I think it's coming up soon. Nobody?
can't hear what you're
Can't hear
saying.
what you're saying,
Oh,
Rabbi.
sorry. There's one other example, very famous example in the Torah, where we are promised large rewards for resting. Anyone know what it is?
For what?
Largely warned for what?
For resting. Sorry, my
Resting.
mic's not very good. Oh gosh. Okay. So the answer is the Shemitah, right? The sabbatical year. Let's have a look at this.
Ah.
1 second. The next page. Okay, who would like to read? Who hasn't read yet? Pam,
Me.
off you go.
And you should ask.
Should you ask?
And should you ask?
And should you ask?
Oh, sorry. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year if we may neither grow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessings for you in the 6th year so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years.
So God says, if you keep the Shemitah and you don't reap and harvest for that year, then the year before, you will have enough left over to cover you, right? So basically, I will give you increased blessings in order you should have what you need. That's a very clear promise, right?
But
With
that's God presuming that you're going to keep the Shemitah
Good
before
point.
you actually do.
Good point, right? What happens if you break it halfway through? I don't know. Good question, right? But that's a very good technical question how that works. But the principle is God says, if you keep the Shemitah, I will find a way to repay you, right? He says, I'll give you enough for 3 years. Going back to Isaac, he says, if you sow and you will reap 100-fold, right? So 100-fold is more than you would expect. So we find in different places, God says very clearly, you do what I say, you will get disproportionate blessings, supernatural blessings. So if that's true for Yitzchak, and it's true for Shemitah, certainly it makes sense it should be true for Shabbos as well. That if you expend money now to celebrate Shabbos, provided you're not completely irresponsible, But like we said, maybe you spend some money at the beginning of the month and you just got your paycheck. God will find a way to put more money in your account. So,
Rabbi,
yeah,
can I ask a question?
yes,
Rabbi,
yes.
what happens if you can't get a loan and you can't get any tzedakah and you haven't got any Shabbos spine then?
So then you go to
Well,
charity. That's when you should go to tzedakah and say, I need help for Shabbos. Right? And if the charity say, well, why don't you take a loan? You say, I can't take a loan because I can't afford to pay it back. Yeah?
yes, but
Let's
okay, but
deal with your
yes,
question now. Let me ask you a different question. You're supposed to give charity, right? You're supposed to give tzedakah. So what do you do if you can't afford to give tzedakah? Should I borrow money to give to charity? Let's have a look. Mark, do you want to read number 7?
yes. One who is in debt should not give large amounts to charity before repaying his debt. Okay.
Right? So if I owe money to somebody, that takes priority over giving charity. Interesting. So there's a, yeah?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if you can't give tzedakah, can you do gifts, acts of kindness instead?
I would say absolutely 100%. There's different ways to give. I'm particularly nowadays when people struggle financially, they give in other ways. They give their time or their expertise. It's a beautiful thing. Yes, absolutely. So again, there's a bit of a theme running here. I, as an individual, should trust in God. God will repay me multiple times. But that shouldn't stop me acting responsibly towards others. If I have a certain amount of money in the bank and I choose to spend it on Shabbos and trust that God will find some other way to cover my expenses, that's fine. If I owe someone money, I can't tell them God will repay you. I have to have a payment plan. I shouldn't give charity if I don't have money to pay back my loans. So the common thread is how I act towards myself. I should have absolute faith in God. And there is this concept of that your parnasa is decided, but that doesn't include Shabbos and Yom Tov. But that shouldn't impact upon how I treat other people. Right? So let's say I owe you £50, and you say, have you got the £50 you owe me? No, I spent it on food for Shabbos, but it's okay, because it says in the Talmud, God will repay. So you say to me, God will repay you. It doesn't say God will repay me. It says it will repay you. You used my £50 to buy your Shabbos food. Yeah, basically. It might sound obvious, but in a society where everyone believes in God, you might say no. People should do that. People should lend money to other people on a whim. So it's this kind of, it's like everything else. It's like, you know, the story of the guy with the boat and the helicopter. On the one hand, you have to make your hishtadlus, your efforts, within the natural way of things. On the other hand, there's a supernatural blessing that comes from God. But that blessing is not an IOU I can give to somebody else.
If it worked,
Yeah.
leave it.
So, what is the mitzvah of charity, by the way? Let's just see. Anyone who'd like to read number 8? Julian? Want to read?
Yeah. If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your fellows in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy fellow. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs.
Right, so this is the mitzvah of charity. So, obvious question, why shouldn't I borrow to give charity? Look at that. Tzedakah is a beautiful mitzvah to help the needy. Should I not borrow money to give tzedakah? And we just said no. So again, it seems like when it's your own assets that you have, by all means, be charitable. Or if you can borrow some money on, that's secured, by all means, use it for Shabbos. Use it even for charity, but don't borrow what you can't pay back. So in Pam's question, the same would apply. Don't overreach. right? Let's say you can't give, interesting principle also here, self-care, right? Don't overreach. On the one hand, the person might say, I don't need to help others because it's all from God. No, you should help others. We learn it from the atheist. On the other hand, in the same way, you shouldn't borrow to give tzedakah and then end up in trouble yourself. You shouldn't overdo it in other areas either. It's the same thing. Don't give what you don't have to give. You know, you often hear stories of people that are givers that give too much and they get ill. That's not good. Give to others, yes. Volunteer, yes. But say no when you need to. That's the same idea. Don't borrow to give tzedakah. But don't run yourself down to help others. Pull yourself out a bit by all means, but don't run yourself down. It's a good paradigm for life generally, just by the way.
I would think, Rabbi, that last verse, should you lend him sufficient, maybe it should be, you should give him sufficient.
Right.
Because
very good point.
He may not be able to pay you back. So I will give you sufficient, but if you can pay me back, then do so.
Right. In fact, actually, I missed that. You're right. It actually says to lend him. So the question seems to be even stronger.
And does this only apply to the people that live in Israel? Because it says it's the settlement in the land that the Lord will give you.
That's an interesting question. Seems like a good source for giving money to Israel. I think because at the time it's talking about when you will enter the land and the various things. I think you think when you it applies to a given community. Jeff picked up on that. I missed that. It doesn't say give him, it says lend him. That's really interesting. So again, we just said don't borrow money to give tzedakah, but we're saying you should lend money to someone for what they need. But again, it's the same idea. When you help another, you do whatever you've got to do. For yourself, you should have the faith in God.
But what happens if the person who's needy is a schmuck and spent all his money beforehand and didn't save up any money? Should he be given any money then?
Maybe when it says lend him, right? As a
Sorry?
It says you should lend him rather than give him, yes?
Right.
So I think the clue there is when you lend someone money, there's a framework of responsibility to them to repay it, right? By the way, this is going on with the government. All these schemes to help businesses, they're loans. The businesses are going to end up owing money. I don't know why they think that businesses that are struggling now, in a year, 2, 3 years, are going to have extra money to pay back their coronavirus loans, right? I'm not sure that makes any sense. But maybe the answer to your question is, that's why the Torah says, open your hand and lend him, meaning don't just give it to him, have some kind of a framework. There are many gemachs.
Okay.
There are many gemachs out there that lend money, right? It's always been a thing in Jewish communities. Free loan societies, they call them, right? They had a lot in the East End. They have them in New York still. Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, they call it. They'll lend you money. They have, most communities have, particularly more from communities, that you can borrow money without interest, right? Or gemach that lends, they call it gemach. Gemach stands for gemilas chasadim, acts of kindness. So you can borrow, chairs for a shiva and things like that. So a lot of places will lend money to somebody, but they will ask for a guarantor. So it's not unconditional. They'll ask you for a guarantor. We'll help you, but there needs to be a framework. So I think that's what the Torah is saying here. Help him. Don't just throw money at him. That's actually not helping him at all. And we know the highest level of charity is to, right, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, teach him to fish and he'll eat for whatever, right? The highest level of charity is to put a person back on their own 2 feet. The answer to Mark's question is, don't enable his being a schmuck. So don't just throw money at somebody. It doesn't usually solve the problem. Enable them and empower them to climb out of their rut. Yeah? Now, you might say, because we're still a bit confused here, spend your money for Shabbos Yom Tov, God will provide. Help the poor. And then we're saying, don't borrow money you don't have. So which is it? So actually, here's a much more fundamental question. Like I said it earlier. Somebody's out in the street begging for money and you say to them, listen, I'd love to help you, but God has decreed that you should be poor. Let God help you. Let's see. Who hasn't read? Iris, we think we're back to you, no? Number 9.
Oh,
Deborah.
okay.
Deborah.
Hasn't Deborah not read?
Deborah read.
No, I
Deborah
have,
read.
Don't know.
and I'll read it. It is taught in a Parsha. Rabbi Meir would say, an opponent may bring an argument against you and say to you, if your God loves the poor, for what reason does he not support them himself? In such a case, say to him, he commands us to act as his agents in sustaining the poor, so that through them we will be credited with the performance of mitzvot and therefore be saved from the judgment of Gehinnom. And this is the question that Turnus Rufus, the wicked, asked Rabbi Akiva.
Yeah.
If your God loves the poor, for what reason does he not support them himself? Rabbi Akiva said to him, he commands us to sustain the poor so that through them and the charity we give them, we will be saved from the judgment of Gehinnom.
Right, Gehinnom being hell, basically, right? So here's another idea. The whole idea of tzedakah. That you could say, why doesn't God help the poor? So say God gives you the mitzvah of having the merit of being able to help them. So that you yourself will be saved from worse things.
Yeah, that's a horrible idea, to think you're going to try and keep a whole section of people down so that you can give them some money so you can get the credit for it. That doesn't seem right.
Right.
I agree with you, Brenda.
So you'll be voting for Jeremy Corbyn?
No. But I still don't want.
There was a letter in Mishpacha magazine, because obviously in America there's a lot of political tensions now. Somebody wrote in saying that basically socialism doesn't work, and the proof of that is look at what happened under communism. And I think that's a little unfair, because the theory of communism, besides for the anti-religious element, the theory of communism, the socialist element, that everyone should have enough to eat and jobs for everybody and greater parity and economic whatever, is not a bad idea.
Very good idea.
Right? But as we know, Judaism and the Torah recognizes private enterprise. It recognizes property ownership, right? It definitely recognizes the gap between the rich and poor, but it advocates that we have to support one another. It's a good question. Should we be happy if there's no poor people? Yes, we should. It's always a joke in certain neighborhoods. Like Purim, you're supposed to go on Purim Day and give money to a poor person. Like, what happens if you live on the Bishop's Avenue? Where are you going to find a poor person?
Somewhere else.
You live in Beverly Hills, or you live in, Hampstead Garden suburb. Where are you going to find a poor person? Serious question. Where are you going to find someone that can't afford, if they can't afford to live there, is it? So it's always, so sometimes that's how a lot of people in Stamford Hill say, look, if you haven't got anyone in your neighborhood to give to, come and give to us. Some people do that, right? The reality is every community has people in need, but you can see the question, right? So, look, it's a bit like, many communities, they have very, very large organizations that organize hostel visiting, right? Please God, they should all be defunct. I guess the answer to this is, we don't want anyone to be poor. But given that there are people, the reality is, that there are people who are poor, God has given us the opportunity to help those people and to redistribute the wealth. Does God believe in distribution of wealth equally? Yes. But whose job is it to do it? Ours and not his. I guess that's the answer to how does Judaism view socialism? I think Judaism believes in a sort of benevolent capitalism with a strong socialist element. We certainly believe in interventionist societies, right? Half the halachas we have are to stop mukta. You're not allowed to touch a pen on Shabbos because you might write. So a lot of laws nowadays, people say anti-smoking laws, and in America, in New York, the mayor or the governor passed a law that you can't serve massive fizzy drinks because everyone's getting obese. The truth is, halakha is full of things like that. We're always protecting people from themselves. We're very nanny state.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Rabbi, Hashem says that there'll always be poor amongst you.
Does seem to be the case, yes. So, yes, we don't want to have the misfortune to be those poor people. But a person should never. So there's a few themes here. Number one, the idea that you're provided for the year doesn't include Shabbos and Yom Tov. And if you stretch yourself to do Hashem's mitzvahs, He will pay you back. But you have to be responsible. So don't do it on someone else's account. Don't borrow money from someone else that you can't pay back. Number two, that you shouldn't stretch yourself beyond your means in other areas. So don't borrow money to give tzedakah. Number three, you might think to yourself that if someone needs tzedakah, that's because God's punishing them or something like that. No. The only reason a person needs tzedakah is to give you the mitzvah of giving them tzedakah. And finally, the power of tzedakah. Oh, it's gone. That's it. Right. So it's quite complex. But I think we started this because God said that Yitzhak sowed the land and he reaped 100-fold, which is a supernatural reward. But there's a principle here. And the principle is, again, it's always like balance. It's the principle of finding a balance between our efforts through everyday life, through the natural order of things, right? When you're ill, go to a doctor. If you need to make money, go out and work, right? If you have some other problem, seek a logical, rational human solution to it. And on the other hand, our faith in God that He will provide. We're supposed to believe that. We're told that explicitly. If we leave our land during Shemitah, God will bless us more, right? If we spend money on Shabbos and Yom Tov, God will bless us more. But it's not, there has to be a framework. So the Talmud says, borrow money against something that you can repay. But most importantly, I think it's a really critical point. Don't impose your faith on someone else. You could say every Jew should believe in God. That every Jew should lend money to every other Jew for Shabbos. Doesn't say that. Don't lend money to someone unless they've got a means to repay it. Seems contradictory. We just said God will repay it. Okay, that's for me to believe. That's not for the bank manager. Right? That seems contradictory. But that's the idea of individual faith in Judaism. I should absolutely believe that God will repay it. But I can't expect the bank manager to believe that, even if he does. So it's finding that balance between our hishtadlus, our efforts, our doing things in a way that makes sense naturally, and God's supernatural reward. And it's all a balance. And that's what we always find. Like person could say, I should sit and learn Torah all day. I don't need to go out and work. A money tree will grow in my garden. It doesn't work that way. And many people are pained that they don't have enough time for their Torah and mitzvot because they're working hard. It's a common thing. Right? When we davened during lockdown last time, we had a good crowd in the morning. We're not getting the same numbers now. A lot of people have gone back to work. Even if they're working from home, they're working long hours. But that's what God demands of us. Any questions? Okay. Apologies for the bad mic. I was using my handset, but the battery went. I need to find out.
I've got a practical question.
Yeah.
Really.
Go on.
If you want to lend or give some money to two people, and one's Jewish and one is not Jewish, is there any distinction between it?
So,
or was that being kind of racist? I don't know.
Look, at the end of the day, everyone, would you not help? Would you not help your own family first? If somebody in your family needed help, right? If somebody in your family needed help and a stranger needed help, who are you going to prioritize?
Yeah.
The family. Right. So by extension, you're going to be more inclined to help somebody from your community, let's say, right? The only thing to say is, but there's another side to that, right? And I'll just end with this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to get thousands of letters from people asking for all kinds of advice and blessings. So one of his secretaries said that he would answer the non-Jews first, then he would answer people from the wider community, and he would answer his Hasidim last. Why? Because he said, my Hasidim will understand. But for a non-Jew that's writing to me and I'm going to delay a response, it's a Chilul Hashem. The only comment I would make on that is there is definitely the concept of Chilul Hashem and Kiddush Hashem. Helping people charitably in the wider community is a very good way of making a Kiddush Hashem.
It's like a plate or some
It
kind.
shouldn't come at the expense of helping one's own
Plate.
community. Sorry?
Okay.
It shouldn't
All
come
right,
at the
thank
expense
you.
of helping or one's own family. Okay, I'm going to go. Wish everyone a good week, etc. Oh, we've got.
And you and your family.
Yeah. Bye.
You.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye,
Yeah, bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.